How's it going, everyone? It has been a Lone Vault Wanderer, here with a Borderlands 3 release date predictions video. And this is kind of an updated video to one I did last year, where I originally predicted that Borderlands 3 would be released from about February of 2018 to May of 2018. And as time went on, I started to lean towards May 2018 being the actual month that Borderlands 3 was most likely to be released. However, it seems like I'm almost certainly going to be wrong with that original prediction, and there's a number of reasons behind that. First and foremost, I did make some slight mistakes in that original video, and looking back with hindsight or retrospect, I can clearly accept that I was wrong in some of those small instances. But also as well, there's been a number of different events that have occurred over the past several weeks and months that suggests that the most likely release date for Borderlands 3 is not going to be early 2018. And a number of those things I can quickly list now include, for instance, Gearbox just showing their tech demo and not really anything more to show that the game is further along in development. Also as well, you had comments by Take-Two during their fiscal earnings report that one, at E3 this year, they aren't going to be showing any new titles. They're going to be focusing on WWE and NBA. So if we're not getting Borderlands 3 shown at this year's E3, it's very unlikely that we're going to be seeing an early 2018 release before next year's E3. I do believe that Gearbox is probably going to be using E3 as a platform to publicize the next Borderlands game because it is going to be a big release. And also thirdly, during that same fiscal earnings report, Take-Two said that during fiscal 2019, that's when they intend to release the next major anticipated title from 2K. They didn't say it was Borderlands, of course, but I think that's the most likely guess here because it's probably not going to be BioShock. Mafia just came out, Civilization's recent too, so it seems everything is pointing towards it being Borderlands. And even if it's not Borderlands, that means the release date's going to be much later than early 2018 as well too. So what I want to do here is update my release date predictions for Borderlands 3. I've done much more research on this, I've been much more thorough. I hope that I haven't made any small mistakes this time around, and if I did, I'll be the first to admit it. But let me show you what I've come up with. So similar to last time, I've created a bit of a timeline of all games that Gearbox Software has had involvement with. They could have been the main developer, they could have had just a small assistance role. Anything that they touched since the original Borderlands was released is on this list right here, and this was sourced from Wikipedia, but I've repurposed it for this particular video. And as you can see, we have a number of elements on the screen here. First of all, you have every single game listed with the associated release year and the release month too. You also have the main developer listed there because sometimes Gearbox Software wasn't the main developer, sometimes they just published, sometimes they just assisted. So I wanted to ensure that we had the main developer recognized there. Then I've listed some important notes that I'll get to as I go through each of those games. And then on the far left there, I have a column called time between major releases. The entire point of this little chart or infographic here is to look at each of Gearbox Software's main developed games and try and determine the really rough time period between each of those major releases. And this is where I made mistakes in my last video, but if you look at the blue highlighted games or titles there, those are the ones that I believe that we can confidently say are Gearbox Software's major releases, the titles that they really put most resources on in between the development of their games. Gearbox Software works on so many different titles, and if we do really want to get a good guess as to when Borderlands 3 is going to be released, we need to kind of get rid of all the clutter, get rid of all the junk, see how long it takes Gearbox Software to make a big AAA game, and then we'll go from there. So I'm going to go down the list and explain exactly what I've done here. First and foremost, we have in October of 2009, the original Borderlands created by Gearbox Software. Mind you, there were other developers that actually helped Gearbox with Borderlands, but we're going to start with that as like the main baseline here and work from there. In June of 2011, we have Duke Nukem Forever. This is an interesting title that I wouldn't consider to be a main release or developed game by Gearbox Software because, as you can see in the notes column there, Gearbox only picked up this game after it was already in development for 14 years by 3D Realms, and they came in towards the end and essentially finished that game up, and then they released it in June of 2011. So we don't really know how much work they had to put into this unfinished game that 3D Realms just took so long to actually create, and they never ever finished it. And also as well, Take-Two sued 3D Realms for taking so long with the development of the game. So we don't know how much work Gearbox had to put into the development of that game, but we can still assume that it wasn't a major game for them because the bulk of the work, or at least the majority of the work, I'm going to assume was already completed at that stage. So then we go to September of 2011, and we have Aliens Infestation, which is a Nintendo DS title by Way Forward. Gearbox Software had some assistance with that, but it wasn't a main title developed by them. Really, their next big developed game after Borderlands 1 was Borderlands 2, that was released in September of 2012. So between Borderlands 1 and between Borderlands 2, they took about 2 years and 11 months, or roughly 3 years, to develop that game. So there you go, we have our kind of first rough timeline. Judging by those two release windows, we can say it takes Gearbox Software about 3 years to develop one of their big AAA games that they put most of their resources into. And then after Borderlands Legends, which was released in October of 2012, that was developed by Gearbox Software, but it was a mobile game, so obviously not a main title, not a game that they would have needed many resources on in comparison to a big AAA console/PC release. We have Aliens Colonial Marines, which was a big game, released in February of 2013, only 5 months after Borderlands 2. So in my original video, I said, well, this was a big game. They only took, 5 months from Borderlands 2 to release this game, which you have to assume as well that they were working on during the time of Borderlands 2. However, if you actually read into the development of this game, there are some accusations made that Gearbox Software was actually diverting resources from working on Aliens Colonial Marines to working on Borderlands. And apparently the DLC for Aliens was mostly done by another developer. Apparently most of the main campaign was done by a third developer. So it's a very convoluted, very complex development for that game. And while all these are kind of accusations, it's still clear that Gearbox had some help developing this game from other studios. And tentatively, I've highlighted it there as a big release, but again, we just need to be a little bit wary of it. I think this is more of a red herring. It's a bit offbeat from how Gearbox traditionally develops their games. So we can consider Aliens Colonial Marines, and there was 5 months between that and Borderlands 2, but we can kind of put it to one side, to be honest. And then after that, we had Borderlands, a pre-sequel developed by 2K Australia. Gearbox Software only assisted with that, so we can disregard that. The Handsome Collection developed by Gearbox, but that was just a remaster, and also as well, Gearbox had help from 2 other developers. Then you had Homeworld Remastered, which was done by Gearbox, but again, another remaster there. You had Homeworld Deserts of Karak, and I believe in this instance, Gearbox might have helped with development, but I think they more had a publishing role, and it was really Blackbird Interactive that developed that game. So the next major release after Aliens Colonial Marines is definitely Battleborn. And Battleborn was released in about May of 2016. So that's about 3 years and 3 months after Aliens Colonial Marines. So kind of consistent with the 3 years between Borderlands 1 and Borderlands 2. Things got a bit complicated with Aliens there, but I still think that we can say at this stage that Gearbox Software takes about 3 years, very roughly, to develop a big AAA game like Borderlands 3. And we also know that Battleborn had about 5 big story DLC, which all wrapped up on the 24th of February 2017. And I've referenced this Eurogamer article multiple times in the past, but I will link it in the description below. But Gearbox did say at one point that once they were finished on Battleborn and all the major DLC for that game, that they would be going on full development mode for Borderlands 3, which we're in that time period now, and we have to assume as well, given the tech demo, etc., Borderlands 3 has already been in development for many years. So suffice it to say, Borderlands 3 will be Gearbox's next big game. They do have other games in development too, like Brothers in Arms and Duke Nukem, so we kind of have to factor those in. How much resources will those games be taking away from Borderlands 3? Who really knows? But given those comments by Gearbox saying that Borderlands 3 will be their next game that they work on, I'm going to assume that most of their resources are working on that title. And disregarding Duke Nukem 3D and Bulletstorm, which one was a re-release, one was a remaster, both of which weren't even done or developed by Gearbox Software, we can say that using that rough 3-year timeline that we determined, we start from Battleborn. That's going to be our first indication of when we could possibly see Borderlands 3 released. So 3 years after the release of Battleborn, which is May of 2016, we get May 2019. So May 2019 is not my prediction, mind you. It's just a rough date that solely looks at the big AAA games, the major releases that Gearbox has developed, and looking at the time period between each of those games and seeing how long it takes for Gearbox to release one of those big titles. That's all it is. So when you look at Borderlands to Borderlands 2, Aliens Colonial Marines to Battleborn, it's about 3 years, so we can say May 2019 is a very, very rough indicator. However, I'm going to be linking this in the description below too. Take-Two mentioned that in fiscal 2019, which mind you is from April of 2018 to March of 2019, so before May of 2019, that a highly anticipated title from 2K's library is going to be launched with Red Dead Redemption 2. And remember, 2K is the publisher of Borderlands. While Gearbox does publish some games, they only develop Borderlands, they don't publish it here. So I think we could safely say that Take-Two was referring to Borderlands there. But fiscal 2019, of course, as I mentioned before, only reaches out to March of 2019. It doesn't go as far as May. So because that release window is much more factual, it's based much more on fact than everything that we've just done in this video, you know, looking at the release windows between each major games. So we have to look at that period to say Borderlands 3 is probably releasing in that window and not May of 2019. But that window is about a year long. We still need to consider how long it takes Gearbox Software to create a big game, and that's about 3 years. So do you know what that does? If we're going to have a Borderlands 3 game released in fiscal 2019, because it usually takes Gearbox Software that 3-year period, the game is probably going to be released in very late fiscal 2019. So it could be late 2018 or it could be early 2019. But judging by Take-Two's comments, it can't be past March of 2019. So we have to work with that as a top limit. But with that being said as well, look at the months that Borderlands 1 and Borderlands 2 were released. You had Borderlands 1 released in October, you had Borderlands 2 released in September. Two very, very close months next to each other, you know, one's after the other. So there might be something to that. Does Gearbox, Take-Two, 2K, etc. lean towards releasing a game like Borderlands in months such as October or September to get out of that noisy November period, to not go too early in the year? I mean, Battleborn was released in May 2016, and that game didn't really do too well. So maybe they're going to be looking at Battleborn, they're going to be looking at when Borderlands was released and saying, you know what, we need to stick to late 2018. We can't go into early 2019 because that might not be the best time for us to release that game. And also as well, if you assume that Borderlands 3 is going to be revealed at next year's E3, or at least shown, maybe not fully announced, but maybe they announce it before next year's E3, maybe they do a big gameplay reveal then, but it might make sense after that year's E3 to say the game's coming this year. It might be more impactful during the E3 of around June 2018 to say, yes, Borderlands 3 is coming, here's a big gameplay trailer, here's a walkthrough, etc., and the game's coming later this year. I think that is going to be the more likely scenario, personally, than seeing it in early 2019. I could be wrong in that regard, but I'm going to say the rough prediction window for Borderlands 3 is around November to December of 2018. But if I'm going to put a hard month to it, I'm going to say as my final prediction that Borderlands 3 is going to be coming out in December of 2018. I think that might be a better period than November, which is usually crowded with Call of Duty, etc. But October of 2018 just seems a bit too early, especially because E3 of that year is only taking place in June. Plus, thinking back on that 3-year period that we determined by looking at their major releases, Battleborn was released in May of 2016. So October of 2018, that would only make it 2 years and 5 months between major releases. And that seems a little bit low to the roughly 3-year Gearbox standard. And December of 2018 is about 2 years and 7 months after Battleborn was released. So at the end of it, even though I still could see this game releasing in early 2019, I still think that's a possibility. I'm going to say, for the purposes of this video, from my opinion, looking at everything that we've just discussed in this video, I'm going to predict the release date of Borderlands 3 to be December of 2018. So please let me know, Waysanders, what you think about that in the comments below. Do you think I'm wrong? Do you think it's going to be earlier in 2018? Do you think it'll be early 2019? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And until next time, this has been the Lone Vault Wanderer. Please take care of yourself, and would you kindly keep fighting the good fight.